Today, we embark on an exploration of Jainism, one of the oldest living spiritual traditions originating in India, whose profound commitment to non-violence, knowledge, and liberation offer unique insights into the human quest for transcendence. Jainism's teachings extend far beyond their historical context, intersecting with esoteric philosophies and practices across cultures and centuries. Jainism emerged in the first millennium BCE as part of the broader wave of movements in India, which also included Buddhism. These movements arose as critiques of the prevailing Vedic Hindu orthodoxy, emphasizing individual spiritual effort, non-violence, and renunciation, rather than ritual sacrifice and social hierarchy. Its divergence from Hinduism was philosophical and ethical, rather than political. Jain teachers rejected the authority of the Vedas, questioned the efficacy of ritual offerings, and sought liberation called moksha through strict ethical discipline and inner purification, rather than through caste-prescribed duties. For some, Jainism is an alternative to the more socially embedded or ritual-focused paths of Hinduism, providing a framework in which spiritual progress is measurable and independent of caste, ritual performance, or priestly mediation. From the ornate temples of Mount Abu to the ascetic practices of mendicants or beggars, sweeping their paths to avoid harming living beings, Jain life is steeped in symbolism and ritual, dedicated to the liberation of the soul. At its heart, Jainism invites us to reconsider the nature of reality and the role of every being within it, teaching a path where spiritual liberation is achieved through strict ethical discipline, knowledge, and deep compassion. Jainism intersects with other esoteric philosophies through its rigorous emphasis on self-discipline, non-violence, and the liberation of consciousness, paralleling practices in yoga, tantric meditation, and Gnostic or Hermetic traditions that seek transcendence of the material and karmic cycles. Let us now begin by examining the ancient textual traditions and core vocabulary that shape this enduring worldview, before tracing how Jain ideas enter wider esoteric dialogues. Jain sacred literature, composed chiefly in Prakrit, Sanskrit, and later regional languages, preserves not only biographies of spiritual exemplars, but unfolding cosmologies, ethical manuals, and ritual instructions. Jainism emerges before us as one of the most ancient spiritual traditions of India, its roots enshrined in canonical works such as the Acharanga Sutra, the Kalpa Sutra, the Uttara Dhyayana, and the Bhagavati Sutra, each bearing witness to the lives and teachings of the Jinas, or revered teachers, whose biographies, teachings, and ritual instructions passed down through the centuries. In the opening lines of the Acharanga Sutra, we find the strict ethic of non-violence echoed in the actions of Mahavira, the last historical Tirthankara, or supreme teacher of the Jain essential nature. The words Tirthankara and Jina are used interchangeably. This essential nature is called the Dharma, a term found also in Hinduism and Buddhism. The word Tirthankara signifies the founder of a tirtha, or fordable passage across samsara, the sea of interminable birth and death. This can be likened to one who has found moksha in Hinduism, or nirvana in Buddhism, understood as a release from the cycle of reincarnation. The Acharanga Sutra is the foremost and oldest Jain text, dating to between the 5th and 2nd centuries BCE, and is the first of 12 Angas, which are principal sacred collections of the teachings of Mahavira, compiled by his disciples. The Acharanga Sutra includes the following words of Mahavira in regards to non-violence. As somebody may cut or strike a blind man who cannot see the wound, as somebody may cut or strike the foot, the ankle, the knee, the thigh, the hip, the navel, the belly, the flank, the back, the bosom, the heart, the breast, the neck, the arm, the finger, the nail, the eye, the brow, the forehead, the head. As some kill openly, as some kill secretly. He who injures these earth bodies does not comprehend and renounce the sinful acts. He who does not injure these comprehends and renounces the sinful acts. Knowing them, a wise man should not act sinfully towards earth, nor cause others to act so, nor allow others to act so. he who knows these causes of sin relating to earth is called a reward-knowing sage. Thus I say. Such a teaching presents Mahavira as one who perceived every form of life as animated by the same luminous essence that travels through countless births. His charge is that true knowledge flowers only when one refuses to harm even the smallest presence, for restraint becomes the anchor that reveals the hidden architecture of liberation. The Acharanga Sutra records early ascetic practices, elaborating on monastic discipline and this concept of absolute nonviolence. The Kalpa Sutra offers detailed biographies of the 24 Tirthankaras. This ascension culminates with Mahavira, the last historical Tirthankara, whose life spanned the 6th century BCE and whose renunciation epitomizes Jain ascetic ideals. The Kalpa Sutra is recited annually during an 8 to 10 day spiritual purification called Paryushan, which celebrates both narrative and rule, during which time the stories of Mahavira's renunciation and omniscience, woven with minute ritual detail, present a vision in which liberation can only be attained by total renunciation. The Kalpa Sutra describes this renunciation as follows. Mahavira, the last Tirthankara, abandoned all worldly attachments and attained omniscience, a term called Kevala Jnana, through the path of renunciation and discipline. Other central texts from the Jain canon, including the Uttara Dhyayana, further urge that he who is free from passions is free from bondage. Passions are the chains that bind the soul. The Bhagavati Sutra teaches that liberation arises through disciplined conduct, clarity of perception, and the steady purification of karma, all cultivated through the guidance that Mahavira gives in its extensive dialogues. Above all in Jain literature, as seen in the words of Mahavira in the Acharanga Sutra, is the concept of Ahimsa, that most rigorous nonviolence which achieves centrality. In Jainism, Ahimsa is not merely refraining from killing, but includes not causing pain or distress to any living creature. This concept of Ahimsa, non-injury extended beyond the common understanding of refraining from violence, is elevated to a profound sensitivity toward the suffering of all sentient beings, urging avoidance of even accidental harm. The Jain ethical insistence on Ahimsa echoes through diverse spiritualities that emphasize harmony with life and the sacredness of all beings, including indigenous shamanic and entheogenic traditions that regard life as interconnected within a living universe. This principle parallels the Buddhist ethical emphasis on compassion and echoes in many esoteric traditions, where the sanctity of all life informs ritual and worldview, such as Taoist reverence for nature's subtle energies. Another cornerstone in Jainism is Anek-Antavada, asserting the relativity of truth and encouraging a perspective that integrates multiple viewpoints. Jains believe that no single statement captures the complete truth about things, and all perspectives are partial, thus fostering intellectual humility and tolerance. The essence of this teaching reverberates through centuries of Jain thought and practice. This stance resonates with esoteric and mystical traditions, valuing paradox and the coexistence of seeming opposites, an alchemy mirrored in the conjunctio phase of transmutation, and reminiscent of the non-dual currents in Advaita Vedanta in Hinduism, as well as the symbolic complexity in Hermeticism, whereby deeper truths are accessible through layered interpretation. Other important terms include pratima, which denotes the stages of spiritual renunciation, and malagunas, the 8 core restraints for Jain mendicants. So far, we've glimpsed the roots and spirit of Jain practice, from its sacred literature to the uncompromising renunciant ideals shaping its followers' lives. Next, we'll follow Jainism's spread and influence through the historical and cultural unfolding of Jainism, tracing how it comes to interact with broader esoteric frameworks accessible to diverse audiences worldwide. Following the early roots grounded in the teachings of Mahavira and those before him, Jainism's narrative unfolds across centuries of historical movement, social transformation, and philosophical divergence. After Mahavira's nirvana, moksha or liberation around 527 BCE, traditions assert that Jainism swiftly began to spread across northern India, with sites such as Magadha or modern Bihar serving as the movement's heartland something confirmed by the existence of ancient inscriptions and references in Buddhist and Hindu literature. Mahavira and the Buddha were contemporaries, both living in the same general time frame during the 6th century BCE. Mahavira was slightly older and lived from approximately 599 to 527 BCE, while the Buddha lived from approximately 563 to 483 BCE. They were active spiritual leaders during the same period and traveled through similar regions in ancient India, though there is no historical record of them ever meeting. The accounts of Rishabha, the first Tirthankara, are elevated in Jain cosmology as predating even the Indus Valley civilization, though critical scholarship typically orients the clearest historical figures much later, particularly with Parshvanatha, the 23rd Tirthankara, whose life and teachings, especially the focus on the Chaturayama Dharma, or the Fourfold Restraints, are mirrored in old texts and corroborated by epigraphical evidence of Jain communities in the Ganges basin and beyond. In these formative centuries, Jainism attracted royal patronage, notably during the Mauryan Empire, with the legendary conversion and abdication of Chandragupta Maurya, whose retreat to the south under the guidance of Bhadrabahu marked the beginning of Jain transmission into southern India. This expansion is inscribed onto the landscape itself, with rock shelters, inscriptions in Tamil Brahmi, and cave epigraphy attesting to the growing presence and local adaptation of Jain renunciant life among southern dynasties. A pivotal development was the gradual divergence between the two principal sects, Digambara, or the sky-clad, whose monastics abandoned all possessions including clothing, and Svetambara, or white-clad, in which mendicants wore white robes. We will discuss these differences in greater depth towards the end of the video. Artifacts such as the Jain bronze sculptures found in Akota, dating to between the 7th and 11th centuries CE, and textually authenticated debates underscore the communal and doctrinal fragmentation, as well as the resilience and adaptability of Jainism in the subcontinent's changing religious climate. With the rise and fall of regional empires, the Guptas, the Chalukyas, the Rashtrakutas, and others, Jain communities participated actively in the economy and patronage of trade guilds and temple construction. Jain scholars and monks, perpetually producing commentaries, new treatises, and philosophical works, ensured the preservation and transmission of a massive scriptural tradition, including works like the Tattvartha Sutra, which attempted to systematize Jain metaphysics in a single Sanskrit treatise accepted by both major sects. Episodes of persecution, communal rivalry, and conversion followed, yet periods such as the 9th century reign of Amagavarsha, who left his throne for Jain monkhood, and the later spread of Jain merchants and scholars into the Deccan Plateau and eventually western and central India, reflected the tradition's vitality in adapting to new circumstances. In this tapestry of history, Jainism's endurance is defined by its capacity to adapt and flourish in new social and political environments, retaining its rigorous ethics while interacting dynamically with the societies and religions around it. Moving forward, we will encounter the distinctive doctrines that set Jain cosmology and metaphysics apart from other systems, and begin to uncover how these ideas have traveled beyond India, entering broader esoteric and cross-cultural frameworks. Jain cosmology paints a vast and timeless picture of the universe, one that diverges significantly from the creationist models common to many religious traditions. According to Jain scripture and commentary, the universe is an eternal, uncreated entity without beginning or end, governed by natural laws rather than a supreme deity. The classic Jain texts describe the cosmos in the distinctive shape of a human figure, standing with legs apart and arms resting on the hips, broadest at the top, narrowing in the middle, and broadening again at the base. In Jainism, the cosmos in human form is called Loka Purusha, and this form expresses both the physical and metaphysical dimensions of reality as comprehended by Jain thinkers, emphasizing a structure that is infinite yet ordered. The esoteric student may draw parallels between the concept of the cosmos, aligned with human anatomy in Jain philosophy, to the concept of Adam Kadmon in Jewish Kabbalah, an archetypal, divine, and formless being that existed before physical creation. This upper man in Jewish Kabbalah represents the hidden unity of all creation and served as the source from which the four lower worlds of creation emanated, and the blueprint for all subsequent human souls. Jain metaphysics distinguishes itself through a profound dualism that furnishes the core of Jain philosophy, dividing all substances between that which is alive, called jiva, the soul or sentient, and that which is not, ajiva, the non-sentient or material, with both devoid of divine creation or external control, setting apart Jainism's cosmology in the Indian spiritual systems. Jainism posits a permanent, individual soul, called jiva, in every living being, which accrues karmic particles through actions, and can achieve liberation by purifying itself through strict ethical discipline and ascetic practices. Buddhism, by contrast, fundamentally denies a permanent self or soul called atta, and teaches that what we consider the self is a temporary aggregation of processes. Liberation or nirvana is attained not by purifying a soul, but by realizing the impermanent and non-self nature of existence, called anatta, thereby ending craving and ignorance. This distinction drives their divergent ethical emphases. Jainism's extreme nonviolence, called Ahimsa, and asceticism are aimed at protecting the soul from karmic accumulation, while Buddhism focuses on the cultivation of mindfulness, compassion, and insight to dissolve attachments and illusions of self. Jain metaphysics characterizes the universe as composed of 6 fundamental dravyas or substances: jiva or conscious souls, pudgala or matter, dharma or the medium of motion, adharma the medium of rest, akasha or space, and kala or time. Notably, dharma and adharma here do not only denote moral qualities, but rather function as principles enabling movement and rest within the cosmos, essential for universe dynamics. The Jain universe is divided into 3 primary loka or realms: Urdhva-loka, the realms of gods and celestial beings; Madhya-loka, the middle world inhabited by humans, animals, and plants; and Adho-loka, the lower worlds or infernal regions populated by beings suffering in hellish conditions. Jains believe that the universe is eternal, matter and souls being equally uncreated. The universe contains gods who may be worshipped for various reasons, but there is no being outside it exercising control over it. These layers form the spatial and existential matrix within which all living beings cycle through birth, death, and rebirth, known as samsara. Jain cosmology further conceptualizes time as cyclical, measured in alternating ascending and descending ages, called Utsarpini and Avasarpini cycles, during which spiritual and material conditions rise and fall. Each cycle contains distinct phases reflecting changes in longevity, morality, and happiness throughout existence, illustrating a worldview deeply attuned to impermanence and renewal. The cyclical time model bears resemblance to the yugas of Hinduism, as well as the concept of eternal return in various mystical traditions, as written about by scholar Mircea Eliade. This spatial temporal universe, with its autonomous and eternal existence, contrasts with theistic doctrines and finds parallels across esoteric traditions. The notion of a cosmos that operates as a self-sustained, law-governed mechanism recalls Hermetic and Stoic philosophies, where the universe is a living organism or logos without external control. Every soul is trapped in cycles of birth and death, bound to the physical world by karma, conceived uniquely as material particles clinging to consciousness, a metaphysical vision paralleling Gnostic and esoteric views on spiritual entrapment and the alchemical pursuit of liberation. As articulated in the Tattvartha Sutra and made explicit by later commentators, the soul is believed to possess, in its purest and unbound state, infinite perception, infinite knowledge, infinite bliss, and infinite energy. Yet these attributes are said to be veiled by the influx and accumulation of karma, the subtle material substance that binds and restricts the jiva throughout the cycles of existence. Karma itself in Jain doctrine is literal, a form of extremely fine matter that attaches to the soul through violent action, desire, and ignorance. And this mechanism is unique in its material specificity, as contrasted with the more allegorical interpretations found in other Indian religions. The idea of karma as a material yet subtle entangling force resonates with alchemical and tantric systems that emphasize the purification of subtle energies for liberation. The soul's entrapment within samsara, or the cycle of rebirth, is attributed directly to karmic entanglement, and liberation or moksha is nothing less than the complete severance of these ties, leading to the soul's ascension to the realm of the Siddha, the perfected ones who exist forever in omniscient bliss beyond the world of birth and death. The journey toward liberation is mapped in the practices of right faith, right knowledge, and right conduct, the so-called Ratnatraya, around which all other ethical and ascetic disciplines revolve, and which are discussed at length in both canonical texts and philosophical commentaries. This mirrors the core ethical principle found in Zoroastrianism of good thoughts, good words, good deeds. These intricate systems of dualism, causality, and non-absolutism set Jain philosophy apart, drawing it ever more deeply into the debates of classical Indian thought. With this doctrinal groundwork established, we will next examine the lived practices and rituals through which the path to liberation is pursued and embodied by lay and monastic Jains alike, before turning to Jainism's encounters with greater esoteric and cross-cultural worlds. Jain rituals and daily practices intertwine ethical discipline and devotional observance, shaping both monastic and lay life in a profound pursuit of spiritual purification and liberation. Jain monastic life is marked by rigorous discipline and a continuous striving toward spiritual purity through a set of ascetic practices and daily rituals designed to minimize harm and purify the soul. Central to Jain life are the vows that govern conduct. Monks and nuns observe the 5 great vows, known as Mahavratas, which demand strict adherence to nonviolence called Ahimsa, truthfulness called Satya, non-stealing called Asteya, celibacy called Brahmacharya, and non-possession called Aparigraha. These vows define the framework within which all other monastic activities take place, from begging for alms to meditation and study. Lay followers observe these principles in attenuated forms tailored to social life, including partial vows called Anuvratas and supplementary duties tailored for householders. The day of a Jain monk begins well before dawn and is filled with prescribed activities, including the Avashyakas, a set of 6 obligatory duties central to ritual and ethical discipline. Among these are Samayika, a dedicated meditation practice lasting 48 minutes, aimed at achieving equanimity and detachment from worldly distractions, signaling a temporary ascetic status that allows practitioners to center the self and renew commitments to ethical discipline. This meditative discipline parallels similar practices in esoteric traditions worldwide, such as Dzogchen meditation in Boon and Tibetan Buddhism, or the contemplative prayers of Christian mystics, all oriented toward transcending ordinary consciousness and stabilizing transformative insights. Another regular practice is pratikraman, a rigorous process of repentance where monks reflect on their conduct and seek forgiveness for any harm caused, reinforcing humility and meticulous self-awareness. Worship in Jainism, both in temples and in monastic contexts, frequently involves puja, or devotional acts directed toward images of the Tirthankaras, who symbolize the perfected spiritual state. This worship may take the form of dravya puja, a term meaning material offerings. These may involve ritual bathing, or water ceremonially poured over an idol, called abhisheka, or offerings of materials such as flowers, rice, or fruit placed before images of the Tirthankara. The worship may also take the form of bhava puja, which is purely psychic, involving no physical offerings but focused mental worship and reverence, emphasizing the mind's power to connect with the perfected beings beyond physical form. Ascetics also use ritual implements like a peacock feather broom to gently sweep the ground before them to avoid harming even the smallest creatures, a practice rooted deeply in the principle of Ahimsa, reflecting an acute awareness of life's sanctity mirrored in indigenous shamanic practices that honor even the smallest forms of life. Fasting, another pivotal practice, performed especially during festivals like Horyushan and Duslukshan, serves as a method for detaching from physical needs and purifying karma, often involving severe restrictions on food and fluids. The fast sharpens the practitioner's resolve and aligns bodily austerity with the mind's liberation, a practice resonating with global entheogenic fasting rites that support spiritual insight and transformation. Jain monasticism also includes careful adherence to spatial and behavioral restrictions to avoid causing harm, upholding the ideal of aparigraha or non-attachment by possessing only a few simple items, such as a robe, a water pot, and a mouth-covering cloth called mukavastrika to prevent inhaling and killing microscopic life. These practices root the Jain monk deeply in contemplation, ritual, and asceticism, embodying the path to liberation through the relentless application of discipline and compassion. Briefly named earlier, communal rituals further punctuate the Jain calendar, such as the annual Paryushan festival, emphasizing repentance, forgiveness, study, and ritual observance, where laypersons and monks alike participate in intense reflection and joint worship. Paryushan literally means abiding and coming together. Another festival is Duslukshan, a name meaning 10 characteristics, which is a 10-day festival focused on the 10 cardinal virtues of the soul. Each day of the festival is dedicated to one of these virtues, which include forgiveness, humility, truthfulness, and celibacy, and the period is marked by spiritual practices like fasting and introspection to purify the soul. These events foster social cohesion and spiritual renewal, acting as public demonstrations of Jain ethical ideals and cosmological principles. Through their disciplined daily rituals and profound ethical commitments, Jains embody the integration of philosophy and practice, where every action carries cosmic weight and spiritual consequence. Our continuing exploration will now consider the sectarian diversity within Jainism and how the tradition's concepts and practices intersect with other mystical and esoteric frameworks, including Hinduism, Buddhism, Bon or Boon, and wider spiritual ecologies. Contemporarily, Jainism is principally divided into two major sects, the Digambara or sky-clad, and the Shvetambara or white-clad. This division, rooted in historical, geographical, and doctrinal developments following the time of Mahavira, highlights both shared spiritual foundations and distinctive philosophical and ritual expressions. The Digambara sect is characterized by its radical asceticism, with monks who practice complete nudity as a symbol of total renunciation, asserting that a true renunciate must relinquish all possessions including clothing. Conversely, Shvetambara monks and nuns wear simple white robes, reflecting a differing interpretation of renunciation and its outward manifestations. This sectarian division also extends to doctrinal texts and practices. Digambaras reject the authority of some Shvetambara canonical texts, suggesting a purer preservation of the original teachings within their own scriptures, such as the Prakrit Sutta Pahuda, attributed to Kunda Kunda, while Shvetambaras accept a broader collection of texts, including the 12 Ungas, and various sutras codified in their Vallabhi canon. The difference in textual tradition underscores varying emphases on ritual, philosophy, and monastic code. One of the most poignant distinctions concerns the role and spiritual capacity of women. Digambaras do not recognize female ascetics as capable of complete liberation without rebirth as a male, reflecting their stringent view on renunciation and liberation prerequisites. Shvetambaras adopt a more inclusive stance, allowing for the possibility of liberation after rigorous ascetic practice, regardless of gender. These divergent views inform communal identity and ritual life to this day. Both sects, however, emphasize the core Jain principles of Ahimsa, or nonviolence, Satya, or truth, Asteya, or non-stealing, Brahmacharya, or celibacy and chastity, and Aparigraha, or non-attachment, and share the same cosmological and ethical foundations. Within the Shvetambara tradition are several subsects, such as the Murti Pujakas, who emphasize idol worship, the Sthanakavasi, who reject image worship, and the Terapanthis, noted for their reformist stance and strict discipline. Digambara subsects include the Mula Song, a term meaning root or original assembly, dating back to the 5th century CE and founded by Kunda Kunda. Another Digambara sect can be found in the Taranapantha, a reformist sect that originated between the 15th and 16th centuries CE, which completely rejects idol worship, instead focusing on the study of sacred texts. The bifurcation of Jainism into these sects parallels similar divisions in other religious traditions, where considerations of orthodoxy, ascetic rigor, and gender influence communal forms, as in certain schools of Buddhism or branches of Christianity, highlighting ongoing dialogues about purity, practice, and authority. From an esoteric perspective, the Digambara ideal of perfect nakedness symbolizes spiritual transparency and radical honesty, echoing themes of stripping away illusions found in mystical traditions worldwide. Meanwhile, Shvetambara's symbolic clothing and ritual ornamentation create a rich field of devotional aesthetics, akin to icon-focused practices in Tibetan Buddhism or the symbolic clothing found in Islamic Sufism. These sectarian differences, far from dividing the essence of Jainism, illuminate the flexible and living nature of the tradition, each expression offering unique paths toward the shared goal of liberation. In summary, Jainism shares with Hinduism a concern for karma, dharma, and the cycle of rebirth called samsara, though it emphasizes strict nonviolence and asceticism as the primary path to liberation. With Buddhism, Jainism intersects in its renunciatory practices, ethical rigor, and focus on overcoming suffering through self-discipline rather than devotion to deities. Jainism differs from Hinduism and Buddhism through its absolute commitment to nonviolence, and its view that liberation is achieved through the complete purification of the soul, rather than divine grace or a middle path. Jainism shares with broader esoteric currents a rigorous ethic of nonviolence, self-discipline, and renunciation aimed at liberation from the cycles of matter and karma, resonating with yogic, hermetic, and mystical traditions that value inner transformation over external authority. Jainism's practice of ahimsa and strict asceticism parallels the ethical rigor of Hermeticism and the monastic disciplines of Neoplatonism, while its meditation on jiva and karmic entanglement echoes Buddhist mindfulness and yogic refinement of subtle energies. Its cosmology of cyclical time and layered planes of existence finds resonance in Kabbalistic Sephiroth, the Pythagorean understanding of numerical harmony, and the Western magical emphasis on correspondences between the macrocosm and microcosm. The emphasis in Jainism on the subtle interplay of consciousness and causality parallels both Eastern meditative practices and Western occult frameworks that explore the refinement of perception and ethical alignment with universal law. Jainism reminds us that the refinement of consciousness begins with the smallest gesture of care, and that a life grounded in compassion can reshape both the soul and the world it inhabits. Currently, there are over 100 Jain centers and temples in North America, with the number being roughly 100 in the United States and additional centers in Canada. The first Jain center in the US opened in 1966 in New York. Jainism's population is experiencing a decline in some areas, particularly in the West, due to factors like low birth rates, intermarriage, and assimilation. However, its core principles of nonviolence and vegetarianism are gaining global traction, leading some to believe the religion itself is not declining, but rather influencing other cultures more widely. The future of Jainism is debated, with some seeing its influence grow through these external factors, while others focus on the demographic challenges like low sex ratios and assimilation, affecting its growth as a distinct, separate religious community. In our next video, we journey from the intricate spiritual discipline of Jainism into the vast and varied realm of Siberian Shamanism, a collection of indigenous practices across northern and central Asia that emphasize the sacredness of nature, ancestral spirits, and the interconnectedness of all life. Siberian Shamanism centers on the mediation between the human and spirit worlds through ritual, trance, and engagement with natural and celestial forces. Practices often include communication with ancestors, reverence for sky and earth spirits, and an attentiveness to seasonal and ecological cycles that sustain communal life. Join us next time as we move from the ascetic and cosmic depth of Jainism to the varied, wild, and mystical reaches of Siberian Shamanism. Where will this journey take us after Siberia? Like and subscribe to find out. Thank you for watching. Find more at joinseek.org.